President Trump is rescinding a key Obama-era immigration policy. The Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals. Is revoking DACA just, or is it killing the dreams of thousands of young immigrants? Kevin Appleby and Mark KRIKORIAN will discuss. And later, have two U.S. senators set up a religious test for a judicial nominee? And are they demonstrating anti-Catholic bias? Catholic League President Bill Donahue is here to discuss that and the effort to tear down monuments all over the U.S. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Kevin Appleby, Mark KRIKORIAN, and Bill Donahue are all straight ahead. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, send me a tweet. I'm at Raymond Arroyo. I will be live tweeting throughout the show, or you can email us at worldover@ewtn.com. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. DACA is on its way out as President Donald Trump fulfilled a campaign promise. On Tuesday, he rescinded President Barack Obama's program to protect young immigrants from deportation. Known as the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program, it's set to expire in 6 months. But the president is giving Congress a chance to come up with a more permanent solution.
I have a love for these people, and hopefully now Congress will be able to help them and do it properly. And I can tell you, in speaking to members of Congress, they want to be able to do something and do it right. And really, we have no choice.
The leadership of the U.S. Catholic Church were among those who immediately and sharply criticized President Trump. The Bishops' Conference denounced the president's decision as reprehensible and a cause of unnecessary fear among immigrant families. Chicago Cardinal Blaise Cupich said the decision was nothing short of heartless. Atlanta Archbishop Wilton Gregory called it profoundly regrettable. We will discuss both sides of this issue in our next segment. And Pope Francis is in Colombia for a 4-day visit. On the first full day of his voyage on Thursday, the Holy Father urged young Colombians to take the lead in promoting forgiveness and to help their country heal from a bloody 50-year war between the nation's government and rebel guerrilla forces. He said youngsters more than adults are able to leave behind what has hurt us and look to the future without the burden of hatred. The papal visit comes nearly a year after the Colombian government and rebel group FARC finalized a peace deal. Francis is expected to show strong support for that agreement. This is the first papal trip to the country since John Paul's in 1986. And Pope Francis spoke about seeing a psychologist, the role of women in his life, and more in a book-length interview published this week. Pope Francis, Politics and Society is an in-depth interview conducted by a French sociologist. In it, Francis reveals that he sought counseling from a Jewish female psychologist for more than 6 months in the 1970s. The sessions occurred at the end of his controversial tenure as Jesuit provincial in Argentina. According to Francis, therapy was a great help at the time when he, quote, needed to clarify things. Later in the interview, the Pope speaks of learning to appreciate a female perspective in his life. He mentioned in particular the influence of an Argentinian communist activist who, quote, taught me to think about political reality, end quote. Elsewhere in the interview, the Pope insists that the Church must rethink its just war theory. He discusses his opposition to same-sex marriage and laments the reluctance among some Europeans to welcome refugees. And this week marks the 20th anniversary of the death of St. Teresa of Calcutta and the first anniversary of her canonization. The Vatican used the week to honor the beloved modern-day saint. At a commemoration mass on Wednesday in Calcutta, Mother Teresa was declared the patron saint of the Archdiocese, where she dedicated her life to serving the poorest of the poor. Meanwhile, in her native country of Kosovo, a cathedral dedicated to Saint Mother Teresa was consecrated in the capital city of Pristina. The Cathedral of St. Teresa of Calcutta, once completed, will be the mother church for all of Kosovo. Boy, I can remember those 8 hours of live coverage of Mother Teresa's funeral. We did it here at EWTN. It was an amazing event. God bless Mother. Another of the 4 dubia cardinals has died without answers from Pope Francis. Cardinal Carlo Caffarra, retired Archbishop of Bologna, passed away on Wednesday after a long illness. He was 79. Cardinal Caffarra, along with Cardinals Walter Brandmüller, Raymond Burke, and the late Joachim Meisner, who died in July, had asked Pope Francis to clarify parts of his teaching in his exhortation, Amoris Laetitia. The 5 straightforward questions about church teaching on marriage and Holy Communion is known in church parlance as a dubia. In 1981, Pope John Paul II made Cardinal Caffarra the founding president of the Pontifical John Paul II Institute for Studies on Marriage and the Family. In 2006, Pope Benedict elevated him to the cardinalate. Pope Francis personally chose Caffarra to take part in the 2 synods on the family. But in the aftermath of Amoris Laetitia, Cardinal Caffarra noted the immense confusion it caused among priests, as well as much, quote, uncertainty and insecurity in the church that only a blind man could deny, end quote. And on a more personal note, Papal Posse member Father Gerald Murray's own father passed away on September 1st. Gerald E. Murray Sr. was 86 years old. Mr. Murray was a devoted husband to his wife, Mary Jane. They were married for 59 years. He was a Korean War veteran and attorney, and Mr. Murray had a strong Catholic faith. He served as a Knight of the Order of Malta and a member of the Friendly Sons of St. Patrick of New York. Please keep the Murray family in your prayers, and our condolences to Father Jerry. And relics thought to belong to St. Peter have been found in a Roman church. The relics were discovered in Santa Maria Church in Capella, in a reliquary box during renovations. They were found in a marble slab below the altar floor. The 11th century church has been undergoing renovations, and clues to the box's contents were found at the church's entrance on an engraved stone plaque. According to the inscription, the reliquary contains the remains of St. Peter, as well as 3 popes and 4 martyrs. All the relics were transferred to the Vicariate of Rome. Those attributed to the first pope will be verified by comparing them with the remains in the tomb of St. Peter's Basilica. And speaking of relics, this made my week. A mother in Washington State sent this to me. It's a picture of her son intensely reading Will Wilder 2, The Lost Staff of Wonders, over cereal. She said, I must be doing something right if a kid is reading a book before school. My answer is she must be doing something right by encouraging her son to read works that he enjoys. Thank you for that. And before we go to break, I want all of our family and friends in Houston, Lake Charles, all over Florida, the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, and South Carolina to know that you are in our prayers and thoughts as you hunker down to recover or shield yourself from the wrath of these terrible storms. I encourage all of you to remember the families dislocated by and ravaged by Harvey and now Irma. They need your support as they rebuild their lives and their homes. Be safe and know that we're here for you. When we return, as he promised during the campaign, President Trump is phasing out a program to protect young immigrants from deportation. Kevin Appleby of the Center for Migration Studies and Mark KRIKORIAN of the Center for Immigration Studies will discuss the moral and practical implications of the decision when The World Over Live continues. Stay right there.
Congress should carefully and thoughtfully pursue the types of reforms that are right for the American people. Our nation is comprised of good and decent people who want their government's leaders to fulfill their promises and advance an immigration policy that serves the national interest.
Welcome back to The World Over. That was Attorney General Jeff Sessions discussing the Trump administration's decision to phase out DACA, the Deferred Action on Childhood Arrival policy established by President Barack Obama. This was intended to protect undocumented children who had come to the United States with their parents as youths, and now we're in a bit of limbo. U.S. bishops have already condemned the decision to terminate DACA. Here to get into the details, as well as the Catholic response, is the Senior Director of International Migration Policy at the Center for Migration Studies, former USCCB Director of Migration Policy, Kevin Appleby. Great to see you. Thank you for coming in. And a little later, we'll talk with the Executive Director of the Center for Immigration Studies, Mark KRIKORIAN. But I want to start with you, Kevin. The president, you heard Jeff Sessions there, reference the national interest.
Yes.
Now, in his statement the other day, President Trump said, "We will resolve the DACA issue with heart and compassion, but through the lawful democratic process, while at the same time ensuring that any immigration reform we adopt provides enduring benefits for the American citizens we were elected to serve. We must also have heart and compassion for unemployed, struggling, and forgotten Americans."
Yes.
Your reaction to that?
Well, I mean, it's sort of heartless, as Cardinal Cupich said, for him to remove protections from these vulnerable young immigrants. At the same time, he's saying that he's being compassionate and fair.
To the American people.
Right, exactly. It leaves them vulnerable to deportation, to countries that they do not know. These are young kids that have been here for years who are contributing. 90% are employed, 90% speak English. They're embedded in our society. And what he's doing is really taking the carpet out from under them and leaving them vulnerable to deportation. And that is not with great heart that the president says he has.
He didn't roll it back instantly and say, okay, you all have to leave. What they said was, we will accept the 2-year deferrals that you have now. If you have those documents in hand, we will permit those to go forward and honor them for the next 2 years. They are accepting new applications for another month, I believe. And he now has said, look, we're going to wait 6 months and let Congress, give Congress an opportunity to come up with a lasting solution. Are you confident they can after 16 years of congressional attempts to figure this out?
First of all, the numbers show that about 600,000 of 800,000, their permits will expire before the 6-month period, so they'll be left vulnerable. I think this time it might be different with Congress, because the president has maybe done the Dreamers a favor by putting this on Congress and setting a hard deadline and really scaring them to do something. And there could be a deal in the works. You could get something that President Trump wants in exchange for the DACA. But what's important here, and what the bishops really want, is that these people, these young people, should have a chance to become citizens. They're Americans in everything but paper. They speak English. They've been here for years. They're working. They love this country. They've got qualities that the president admires, that they're fearless, they're ambitious, they work hard. This is what Americans want. So we should keep them here, and we should give them a chance to earn citizenship.
The Trump administration will say, look, if you keep this door open, you're only encouraging more undocumented parents to come with their children in the hopes that their children will be grandfathered in through a program like this.
Well, that can be solved through legislation. The legislation that's been introduced, the DREAM Act, has a certain time certain before it cuts off for certain people to qualify. You have to have come 4 years before the enactment of the bill and be a certain age, under 16 when you came. So there's limits on the numbers that will be affected.
And what do you make of the Trump argument in his statement that this was an illegal act, that President Obama exceeded his authority? Indeed, if you read the memo for DACA, he sort of says that. Obama basically says, look, I'm kind of going beyond my authority, but Congress won't act, and we've got to do something, so here's what I'm doing.
Well, there's different opinions on that. There are over 100 legal scholars wrote the president and said, we disagree with that assessment. The Supreme Court was tied 4-4 on that issue. So there's differences of opinion. I think that was sort of a ruse to really end the program. And I think Attorney General Sessions is aware of that. There's differences of opinion. They decide to go with one side of it.
Yeah, well, 10 attorney generals were threatening to sue the Trump administration if they didn't make a decision on DACA, right?
True, and 20 other attorney generals disagreed. So there's a difference of opinion.
What would you like to see? What would you like to see as a lasting solution here? Is there such a thing possible?
Well, I think passing the DREAM Act alone by itself with a path to citizenship would solve this problem. I think it's the just thing to do. I think it's important for Catholics to know that these are young people that are in our churches or in our communities. The majority are Catholic. And
the vast majority of these people come from Mexico. 92%
Central America
come from Mexico and then Central America.
So they're Catholic. So we need a permanent answer for their status. Let them become Americans because they're going to contribute over the years. They're going to be future leaders. They've already shown that. They've shown the talent and energy, and they really want to be Americans. Let's let them be Americans.
I have a suspicion that Donald Trump may be the only person who could make this happen, that there might be a congressional fix here because of his credibility on the issue with his base and with Americans who want enforcement. He may end up getting a border wall out of this, and the DACA kids might get what they're looking for as well.
Perhaps, but the president has to put his money where his mouth is and lead. He needs to work with Congress and put his muscle behind a bill and get it to his desk, and he has to sign it. He hasn't said he'll sign it.
Well, he said if they come up with something that's fair, that he would sign it.
Right.
But what does that look like? He didn't give them any benchmark. My problem is he didn't give them any benchmarks that this is what I'd like you to achieve, or I won't sign anything unless A, B, C, or D is covered. That leaving it in Paul Ryan and Mitch McConnell's lap is really a good move.
As I said, he needs to lead.
Let's talk about the Catholic response to this, which has been voracious.
Yes.
The Bishops' Conference came out and called it cruel. You had Cardinal Joseph Tobin of Newark. I want to share this with people. We'll put it up on the screen. He says the decision to phase out the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals executive order is malicious. And then he says whether or not the previous administration had authority to institute DACA does not matter. The 800,000 Dreamers affected by the rescission are people. Now, let's wait a second here. I mean, the fact is, whether the previous administration had the authority or not does matter. I mean, we are a country of laws. You have to abide by the law. And if Trump were doing something crazy, going above and beyond constitutional authority or his own authority, everyone would rightly and should condemn him for doing so. Is Trump right and Jeff Sessions in saying Barack Obama crossed a constitutional line here?
Again, the courts are divided, lawyers are divided. On the response, yes, it's unusually harsh language from bishops to this, but I think it reflects that a lot of these bishops know these young people. As I said, they're part of our communities, they're part of our parishes. They have every attribute that you want as an American, and they came here not on their own volition, and they would be sent back to a country they don't know. So in their eyes, it's a true justice issue, and there's really no justification for the president rescinding the program. They've done, really, by and large, they've only contributed. They've not committed crimes. That's probably what the source of the vociferous opposition from the bishops is.
Even Cardinal Dolan of New York issued a statement. It reads, all the Dreamers who now face such uncertainty and fear, please know that the Catholic Church loves you, welcomes you, and will fight to protect your rights and your dignity.
Well, I hope he can back that up by telling the parishioners around the country to write their senators and congressmen and to have them pass the DREAM Act. That's where they can make a big difference.
Well, when I read it, I thought, my goodness, I've never seen a statement like this, or really the unanimity that you're seeing from bishops across the country in quite this way.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a part of me that reads this and goes, well, why is it only Dreamers who are entitled to, being welcomed and loved and get the church to fight for their rights?
Right.
I thought the church was fighting for everybody's rights and protecting everybody's dignity.
They have. And they have a record of wanting immigration reform for all immigrants. So this is a particularly sympathetic group. These are people that are leaders in the church. They're leaders of they're the future of the church. I mean, the church is growing among these young people.
There are some who look at this and they say, wait a minute, the church has a financial interest in making sure that migrants and refugees continue to flow because they do get a substantial federal endowment from this, a federal grant for resettling migrants and refugees.
Right.
It is it's millions of dollars. Is that a valid criticism to say, wait a minute, you're financially vested in this?
Now, on this, you're talking about refugees.
I'm talking about the Migration Refugee Service of the Bishops'
program, which is much different than the Dreamers, who aren't refugees.
Right.
However, I would say, in fairness, that this is an institutional issue for the church. It is about the Catholic Church and people who are Catholics, and it's just like any practitioner. They're going to take care of their constituents, just like any elected official would. Why would you turn your back on people who are in your pews like that and need help and need advocacy? So in some way, it's a justice issue, no doubt, but it's also institutional, and the bishops shouldn't shy away from that. You know, it's part of who we are as church.
Kevin Appleby, thank you for
Great.
your insights and for
Ray.
being here. For more information on Kevin's work, you can go to the Center for Migration Studies. Visit them at cmsny.org. And now joining us with his take is the Executive Director of the Center for Immigration Studies here in Washington, D.C., Mark KRIKORIAN. Thank you for being here, Mark.
Glad to be here.
I want to get into the economic cost of deporting all of these people if you do rescind DACA 100%, which apparently is not in the offing. According to estimates, some studies, deporting the 800,000 DACA recipients could cost at least $60 billion and reduce economic growth by $280 billion. Will it?
Lobbyist baloney, I'm afraid to say. Because, first of all, they're not going to be all deported. That's not, even when their work permits run out, ICE has all kinds of criminals and stuff to look for rather than them, number one. Number two, it's 700,000 people or so in an economy of, what are we now, $15 trillion, 150 million person labor market. There are arguments for legalizing the DACAs. I'm actually for, under certain circumstances, giving these
granting them
young
legal
people
status.
amnesty. Yeah, but the economic argument is just, it's baloney. It's lobbyists throwing everything they can up against the wall and seeing what sticks.
Well, you heard me mention Cardinal Tobin, who said it didn't matter if President Obama had the authority to do this. People's lives are at stake. President Obama himself said that Trump's actions was not legally required and that you're threatening the future of a group of young people. You'd respond how?
What the Cardinal basically said was the end justifies the means. That is exactly what they're saying. And the end isn't even all that essential. In other words, it's not saving anybody's life. If it is important to give legal status to these illegal immigrants who grow up here, and I think there's a humanitarian case to make for an act of mercy.
Right.
It has to be done the right way. There's a reason Congress has an Article 1 of the Constitution. It's two separate arguments. Is DACA legitimate? And should the young people, or they're really in their 30s, a lot of them at this point, should they be granted legal status? Those are two completely separate arguments. DACA is illegal. It had to be rescinded. It should have been done in January.
Because in your mind, the president shouldn't have done it in the first place.
The president doesn't get, President Obama doesn't get to make law, and that's what he was doing. He used the pretext of what they call prosecutorial discretion, where you have to decide who you're going to enforce the law against, because you can't do everything all at the same time. That applies. It's obviously legitimate. It's the basics of any realistic enforcement, but you do it one at a time, individual cases. What Obama did was create an entire program that conferred benefits, work permits, Social Security numbers, etc.
I want your reaction to this. In a big interview on 60 Minutes, Charlie Rose asked Steve Bannon, the president's former advisor, what he thought about being a Catholic. Cardinal Dolan's response to DACA. Watch this.
Can I remind you, a good Catholic, that Cardinal Dolan is opposed to what's happening with DACA? Cardinal Dolan.
The Catholic Church has been terrible about this.
Okay, fair enough.
The bishops have been terrible about this. By the way, you know why? You know why? Because unable to really to come to grips with the problems in the church, they need illegal aliens. They need illegal aliens to fill the churches. It's obvious on the face of it. That's what the entire Catholic bishops condemning. They have an economic interest. They have an economic interest in unlimited immigration.
Your thought?
I think that's true, but people's motives are obviously a combination of many things.
You believe that the Catholic bishops only want immigrants to come in, illegal immigrants to fill the pews?
No, I'm saying that's clearly part of it, but that's not all of it. People want to feel that they're doing well as doing good. And, you know, the church obviously sees its role as helping the downtrodden. I mean, feeding the hungry and clothing the poor. There's no question about that.
Well, the line we often hear about you have to welcome the stranger. That is the church's role. I don't know if it's the federal government's role, but it's certainly the church and individual believers' role, Catholic or otherwise, to welcome strangers, help these people in need. They do need help. If there's an argument...
There's a different thing here. Helping the stranger in your community, however it is he got there, is one thing. Pressuring the state to make decisions about who is let into the country is a completely different thing. That is not something that is really legitimately covered by the idea of welcoming the stranger.
I mean, I think you're on firmer ground making the case that the bishops have an economic incentive because they're so reliant on that $92 million or so in federal grants they get every year for their migration and refugee services. I mean, I think is a firmer argument than, well, it's to fill pews. I'm not so sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is both, though, because look, the church has had a lot of problems. In there's like a third of all Catholics, people who are baptized as Catholics, are no longer, in any meaningful sense, part of the church. This is a problem. It's got a lot of reasons. Some of them specific to the church. Some of them sort of more general socially. In a sense, it's not just a way of money. It is a way of their sensing that they're still fulfilling their proper mission and their proper role.
I don't want to get into this for long, but I remember reading in 2013, you were volunteering at Catholic Charities, I believe it was.
Right, yes.
And
teaching citizenship classes.
And you were asked not to come back.
Yeah.
Why?
It was citizenship classes I was teaching. It wasn't English because I figured you never know who they're going to be illegal immigrants. They're citizenship, they're all legal immigrants. They all have green cards. They want to see what the test is like. And so I was happy to do it. There's nothing political about it. It was all, Washington's the father of our country, Lincoln freed the slaves, that kind of basic stuff that kids learn if they grow up here, but adults don't.
Right.
Well, then the Washington Post did a feature on me in the style section. It's of the newspaper. Yeah. And that morning, the morning it came out, they called up and said, we can't have you teaching here. And so that's the way it was. It's unfortunate, but it's the way it is.
Yeah, no, I remember that article. It's a little troubling. There was a tweet that the president sent out that I'd like your reaction to. After meeting with Democratic leaders, Nancy Pelosi, in fact, requested that he tweet something to assure the DACA young people, to assure them. Here's what he sent out. We'll put it up on the screen for you. It says, for all of those DACA that are concerned about your status during the 6-month period, you have nothing to worry about. No action.
Yeah, I mean, he's muddling the message. The day before, or 2 days before, he ended the program. Now, he had a grace period, a 6-month grace period. That's what he referred to there. And that was a prudent and sensible move, I think, to say that nobody's work permits will expire until 6 months from now, because that gives Congress a chance to do its job.
Right.
But, this latest tweet really is saying, especially if you combine it with the previous day's tweet where he said, well, if Congress doesn't do anything in 6 months, maybe I'll just let everybody stay anyway, or something to that effect. He's stepping all over his point. I'm beginning to think he hired a ghostwriter to write the art of the deal, because I'm not sure he really has that quite down the way he should.
Okay. Now, you are very suspicious of a new DREAM Act passing. And there is a lot of talk about reigniting the DREAM Act, but as I said earlier, this has been tried for 16 years, Mark. They've never been able to get the DREAM Act through. Why do you think it won't work this time?
Well, I'm not sure it won't work. I'm afraid that it will work, because this is a sympathetic group of people. It always failed in the past because it was still just a potential thing, whereas now there's some 700,000 or actually total almost 800,000 people
already
have
benefiting.
This DACA program, this work permit, Social Security numbers. It's sort of DREAM Act light. And so that's a real thing that you have to somehow deal with. So my fear is that they will legalize those people without including any steps that would limit the damage from any amnesty. All amnesties attract more illegal immigration, so you need to have an enforcement component to it. And they also will supercharge down the road legal immigration as family members sponsor other family members, and it just goes on in a chain forever. So something that fixes or at least addresses those two problems with a DREAM Act or a DACA amnesty is actually probably a good idea, but a naked DACA amnesty, as it were, is not a good idea.
So I'm going to give you the same chance I gave Kevin a moment ago. What would you like to see if you could write this legislation and get it passed? Sounds like you'd like to see some kind of border wall leverage used during this DACA conversation. But earlier you said you'd support giving them some legal status.
Not the border stuff. I mean, the one hand is give everybody who had a DACA permit, give them a green card. Just rip off the Band-Aid and get it over with. Not a lot of hoops and fines and all that baloney. But in order to limit the damage so that that doesn't do more harm than good, two major things. One, on enforcement. Frankly, the border, we're actually doing okay at the border. What we need is the work site. There's a system called E-Verify.
E-Verify, yeah.
Right. It's a free online system. So when you hire somebody, you take their information for Social Security and IRS, you're able to check online to see whether they're telling you the truth. That's voluntary, widely used, but not yet required. So Congress is the only one that can require that. The Democrats have been fighting that for years. So that's one thing. The other is parts of what is called the RAISE Act by Senator Cotton from Arkansas.
Which was tried last February and failed. Purdue and Cotton.
It didn't fail in the sense that it actually came up. It was introduced.
But it didn't get through Congress.
Well, it was reintroduced recently with some changes.
And
the president made a big deal of it. And the point of that is that it focuses family immigration rights only on husbands, wives, and little kids, which is where it should be. You're American. You have a right to expect your fellow citizens to let you bring in somebody that you marry abroad or adopt a baby abroad, as long as it's all legit. But there's all kinds of other categories. Parents, adult siblings, all that stuff's got to go. So my point is you put that package together, RAISE, E-Verify, and the amnesty for DACAs, you have a small, coherent package. It's not 1,000 pages long. Any intelligent person could sit down for half an hour and read it, understand it. Everybody will get something that they want. Nobody gets everything they want. That's the way politics is supposed to work.
That's the only way it works. Mark KRIKORIAN, thank you for being here. And if you'd like to follow Mark's work, it can be found at the Center for Immigration Studies, CIS.org. Up next, Catholic League President Bill Donahue is here in studio to discuss the ongoing monument controversy and a judicial nominee subjected to questions about her Catholic faith by 2 U.S. senators. Wait till you see this. The world over returns in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. My next guest is the president of the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights. He joins us in studio with analysis of the ongoing showdown over monuments, the HHS mandate, and whether a Catholic judicial nominee was subjected to a religious test this week during her confirmation hearing. Welcome back to the program, Bill Donahue. Bill,
thank you so much.
Thank you for coming in. I want to start with this sensational Senate Judiciary hearing. We saw Amy Coney Barrett, who is a Notre Dame law professor, mother of 7, and a Catholic. And at one point during the hearing, she was subjected to a very queer line of questioning, and by 2 senators, Dick Durbin of Illinois, and Dianne Feinstein of California. I want to play first Dick Durbin. Listen to this and give me your reaction. Roll that.
Do you consider yourself an Orthodox Catholic?
I am a Catholic, Senator Durbin. Orthodox Catholic, we kind of, as I said in that article, we just kind of use that as a proxy. It is not, to my knowledge, a term currently in use, but if you're asking whether I take my faith seriously and I'm a faithful Catholic, I am, although I would stress that my personal church affiliation or my religious belief would not bear on the discharge of my duties as a judge.
Now, Durbin was referencing a 20-year-old article that Ms. Barrett is the author of. Your reaction to that, is that unconstitutional behavior?
It comes perilously close to the religious test. I've never heard any senator ask somebody, are you a devout Jew? I've never heard somebody say, are you a practicing Mormon? What kind of an evangelical might you be if you get onto the court? These things are supposed to be irrelevant. Now, this man has a history of doing this.
Dick Durbin.
Dick Durbin.
Himself as a Catholic.
Well, he said that for 19 years he went to Catholic education. He never heard the term Orthodox Catholic. I would believe him on that. I'm not certain where he went to school. That would be an interesting show for another day. But if you go 19 years to a Catholic school and you don't know what Orthodox Catholic means, well, let me explain it to him. It means that you accept the teachings of the church. So, for example, the Catholic Church teaches that abortion is intrinsically evil. So if you reject that teaching, you're certainly not Orthodox. Mr. Durbin would know something about that.
And what do you think he meant by using that term, to parse that term out?
Right. I wish that they would be honest. That what they're really getting at is this. Are you taking your cues from Rome? We're right back to where we started from in the 19th century with the old nativist assumption that if you're Catholic, you can't be an independent thinker. And are you going to use your Catholicity as the prism by which you interpret law? He knows where he's going with this. Why not be man enough to come out and say, listen, if you're a practicing Catholic, I don't know if you're fit to be on the bench. Let him make that argument instead of being coy about it.
Catholics need not apply is basically what you
Well, that's what he's going there. Yeah, you check your Catholicity at the door.
Let's watch this. This is Senator Dianne Feinstein. And again, she too is musing and referencing this woman's faith. Now, remember, Amy Barrett, the article in question and her long history of articles mostly reference the fact that a judge can't afford to overlay their personal religious belief atop their judicial reasoning, that these are two separate entities. Scalia, whom she clerked for, often wrote about the same thing. Watch this, Dianne Feinstein.
I think in your case, Professor, when you read your speeches, the conclusion one draws is that the dogma lives loudly within you. And that's of concern.
Bill Donahue, I sense the dogma lives loudly in you as well.
Quite frankly, I think the bigotry looms large in her. And matter of fact, Dianne Feinstein, just like Dick Durbin, same thing, roll the clock back 12 years ago. John Roberts is up for the Supreme Court. Yeah. And what does she do? She questions him on his Catholicity. They have anti-Catholic bigots working on the staff of Senator Feinstein and Senator Durbin. You can't have 12 years apart and go ahead and have this kind of a quasi-religious test that is perilously close to a religious test, which is unconstitutional. They never do this about any other religion, just our religion. And what they're basically saying is this. You know, if you're a Catholic and you may be pro-life, that will color everything you do. Raymond, if you're a lawmaker, it's okay for you to have your religiously informed conscience dictate to some extent what you're going to think is good for the public. A judge has a different charge. I don't want a Catholic who's pro-life and who accepts the church's teachings to let that inform them the way they interpret the Constitution. They have a different charge than an executive branch or the judicial branch has. So I think the question begs the issue again. Are we back to where we started from in the 19th century? The old nativist assumption that you take your judicial cues from Rome, you're not an independent thinker, and this is basically a way of trying to screen you out. If somebody said to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, you're a secular Jew, and you're coming up for the Supreme Court, as she was back in the 1990s, and you were the ACLU's point girl on reproductive freedom, can you tell us how your secular thought and your secular upbringing in a Jewish household, how that might affect you? And would you look through the ACLU prism, people would go crazy.
Oh, no, there'd be lawsuits for them.
Right. So no, this is an invidious, pernicious attack on this woman, Professor Barrett at Notre Dame. They should be man enough and woman enough to come out there and say, we think that you're going to take your thoughts from Rome, and therefore you're not suitable for the bench. And it's I haven't seen this kind of anti-Catholicism since actually Feinstein and Durbin did this 12 years ago.
It's curious that you use the
They have a history on this.
That the dogma lives loudly within you.
Right.
I had a lot of emails today that said, what about Dianne Feinstein's dogma on abortion and certain rights? And I mean, she has her own dogmatic beliefs that wend their way into her policy.
And what about Durbin, who doesn't understand what an Orthodox Catholic is? I actually had to inform him in my letter today because I wrote to both of them.
You wrote them 2 letters. Yeah. Why did you write them letters? What do you want? What do you expect?
And we also had everybody contact Senator Grassley, who is the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, to probe this issue. What's going on here about the propriety of asking these kinds of questions? If Durbin doesn't even know that there's something called Orthodox Christianity, he thinks that we invented the term Orthodox. Has he ever heard of Orthodox Jews? I mean, these people are amazing how they always consider themselves to be the most tolerant people on the block, and the bigots are somehow the Trump people. They are the biggest bigots. They're well-educated, and they're very clever in the way they mask it. You pull off the mask, and what you get is a redneck.
You believe this is anti-Catholic bigotry?
There's no question it is, because all you have to do is to substitute Catholic for Jew, or for Mormon, or for some other religion, Muslim. Could you imagine that you had a practicing Muslim up there, and they're asking him whether or not your interpretation of the Quran will affect you on the bench? That your views scream loudly as dogma to us? Are you an Orthodox Muslim? Can you imagine the firestorm over that?
No,
but we're supposed to take it because we're Catholics.
Let's shift gears. I want to talk about the monuments. We've been seeing this ongoing dialogue, worse than a dialogue. We've been seeing really acts of violence, people tearing down monuments on their own, mayors and city councils taking down monuments because sections of the society considered these monuments and mementos offensive. Most recently, St. Junipero Serra in California was splattered with red to indicate the blood. In the eyes of the protesters, they feel he somehow has native blood on his hands. What's happening here?
What's happening is that Pope Benedict XVI was right from the beginning. He warned what was happening in the West. Multiculturalism is ripping apart the Western Judeo-Christian roots of our civilization. And that if a free society is going to exist, you have to honor the past. Right. We know that everybody who's been a famous public person doesn't come to the table with his hands clean. There's no such thing as Mr. Clean. And this is the most contrived controversy I've seen in my lifetime, because up until about a week from yesterday, nobody ever bothered about this issue. You had one case, South Carolina, Nikki Haley, here and there. But all of a sudden, we have people in the streets, and what are we going to do? All these people, do they really want to go down the line? I'm prepared to tell you about some people tonight who we honor, and I think we should. But once you find out some other things about them, I guess we have to break those statues too.
Yeah. What do you think is driving this, though, in the macro?
Right.
Is it to sweep from history and the memory of a country certain individuals that you perhaps find offensive, or a story you don't want to tell? What's driving it? Hatred. Is it iconoclasm?
No, it's hatred. There's nothing noble about this, not amongst the leaders. There might be some innocent people in the country who have been drawn into this. Hatred of the West. Look, it began in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s when we knocked down the nativity scenes. And they decided, well, you can't have prayer in the schools, okay? Then we went to multiculturalism in the 1980s. There's no such thing as one civilization being better than the other. It's all an attack on the Judeo-Christian ethos, that which made Western civilization what it is. Benedict understood this better than anybody. And now what you have is the idea that if you have a hero out there, we're going to find out that, well, there are things in his life that we don't like and which we could all agree might be morally reprehensible, and we're going to use the standards of 2017. That's the prism by which we're going to look at, and you don't measure up. And the people who are making these judgments are people like Mayor de Blasio in New York City, who says that black people don't have a right to have a billboard talking about abortion. He said it was good to ban that from New York City. I mean, you take a look at the people. You have riots in the street by people who say, one of the things I've been looking at here are, what about the abolitionists? Now, this is something I've been looking at very carefully. Quite frankly, the people in this country, William Lloyd Garrison, Frederick Douglass, wonderful people. They were also anti-Catholic. Almost all of the abolitionists were notoriously anti-Catholic.
Why?
Well, the Pope, you see, had a slave grip on the people. Slavery was wrong, and so was the Catholic Church, because it didn't allow independent thinkers. I think Senator Feinstein and Senator Durbin would probably agree with that. And that's why I say nothing really much has changed in all this particular time. But you have the feminists involved, and you have Elizabeth Cady Stanton, a notorious anti-Catholic bigot, as was Angelina Grimke. Now, these people were called the liberals in the 1830s, 40s, and 50s. They were in favor of rights for African Americans. I applaud them. They were in favor of rights for women. I applaud them. And they hated Catholics. And they were all run by the Pope. They're the ones who, like Lyman Beecher, one of his daughters, of course, was Harriet Beecher Stowe of Uncle Tom's Cabin. He was leading the charge on this. That's why they burnt down all the convents, beginning with the Ursuline convent in Boston. The violence that took place as a result of this bigotry. Look at the Ivy League schools. Harvard University had several presidents who owned slaves. Take a look at the origins of Yale, Dartmouth, Columbia. Go outside the University of Pennsylvania. I've looked at this. It's an astonishing record.
So here's my question. Are you asking that those monuments come down to the people you just mentioned because they were all anti-Catholic?
Now, with Samuel Morse, telegraph guys, Morse code, okay? Yeah. They got a statue of him in Central Park. Notorious anti-Catholic. Frederick Douglass, anti-Catholic. Henry Ward Beecher of Lyman Beecher, that lineage. Yeah. Cadman Plaza, Brooklyn, they got a statue of him. I don't want them taken down, but I want to make a point to Mayor de Blasio and to this country. If you want to play this game, and that's what it is, it's a game, that you're going to cherry pick and you're going to say certain people don't measure up. I'm going to point out all the anti-Catholic bigots in the ranks of the people whom you regard as heroes. Now, I don't want the statues taken down. The position of the Catholic League is presumptive. We are presumptively opposed to doing it. If a local community, not of elites, but of the people, rank and file, want to remove a statue, I believe in Federalist principles, so I don't want to stand in the way of that.
Right.
But presumptively, I am opposed to it. This is the deracination of Western culture, and they're literally taking a hammer to it. You know, in Mao's China, they actually took in the bulldozers, and they ripped up the ancestral graves. ISIS did the same thing throughout the Middle East and the mosque and whatnot. I mean, this is what you want to do. If you really hate America and you hate Western civilization and you hate Israel, what you do is you rip up its roots. That's what this is all about. It's not based on justice. It's based on hatred.
You know what people will say? They'll say, wait a minute, Bill. These were traitorous leaders of a secessionist movement that sought to enshrine slavery as a national way of life, and that was beaten back, and we should have no vestige or memory of any of these men.
So what are we going to do with Increase Mather, the president of Harvard, and Eliot, and all the others who were there?
What about Thomas Jefferson?
What about Rutherford?
Ben Franklin? And
what about Ralph Waldo Emerson? They have a statue of him at Harvard University, another anti-Catholic. I mean, you can go right down the line. John Adams, Samuel Adams, Ulysses S. Grant, Millard Fillmore, Rutherford B. Hayes. I mean, take a look at Edgar Allan Poe and some of his writings. Take a look at Melville and some of his writings. These are the heroes on the part of the left. And I'm simply saying, you're not going to persuade me that all your guys are good guys and all my guys are bad guys. What are you playing, some little stupid kindergarten game?
What about MLK?
Oh, Martin Luther King, another man who's, of course, should be celebrated for the great good that he did in bringing whites and blacks together. Yeah. We know he was a womanizer. We know he was a violent womanizer. The night before he was killed, he took a woman and threw her across his bed. How do I know that? Because I can read. Take a look at Ralph Abernathy's book about this. He shared the room with Martin the night before. He also plagiarized his dissertation from a guy by the name of Boozer and the same department in theology at Boston University, copied word for word whole sections of it. Boston University hasn't even denied it. Now, because he was a womanizer, because he was violent, and because he was a plagiarizer, these are serious marks against Martin Luther King Jr. Does that detract from the good that he did in bringing whites and blacks together?
No, it doesn't.
Not at all. But again, I'm tired of people saying, well, we have St. Martin over here, Thomas Jefferson over here. Of course, he belongs down there with Dante in the circles of hell. I mean, I don't know where these people are coming from. If you're informed about history, you know that nobody comes to the table with his hands clean. So let's stop this little game.
Well, my feeling is history is replete with examples of great nobility in a life and dark shadows in a life. And our history as Americans are made up of this entire gumbo of people, good, bad, and indifferent.
Right.
We have to acknowledge it. We owe it to our children and to the future to preserve this memory, good or bad. Tell the whole story. I want the whole story of Robert E. Lee. I want the whole story of Beauregard, who spent the post-war years after being a general in the Confederate Army, spent his fortune building schools for black children, free schools. That story is a worthy and good one to tell. And I think there are lessons to be gleaned from even the dark shadows of a life. You mentioned Martin Luther King. Tell that whole story.
Right.
That humanizes him and makes it more attainable for us.
We're not allowed to do so because when Ralph Abernathy told the truth about the violence of Martin Luther King the night before he was shot, Jesse Jackson implored him not to put that in the book. He said, but it's true. He said, I know it's true, but we're not going to tell people. So we're going to have a cover-up for some people. It's always the same thing, isn't it? There are certain iconic heroes that the left loves, you know, all the feminists and whatnot, but I can't tell the truth about them. Margaret Sanger is another one, got the plaques all over the place. But when it comes to people that we admire, they're going to try and knock them down like Thomas Jefferson.
What about the explanatory plaque? Some have said just put an explanatory plaque there. That's enough on some of these
I don't think anybody's going to turn around and look at a plaque. I think if you want to talk about the complicated legacy of great people in world history, then do it. Columbus was full of contradictions. Jefferson was full of contradictions. We're all full of contradictions.
Right.
Tell the truth. But this little bit of plaque, this is another way to appease people. And who are we appeasing? Antifa? I mean, these hoodlums out there? What's all about?
No, it's to me, it's disrespectful to the future and to our children. We deny them the opportunity to hear that story. And I'm for more statues. I want statues everywhere. Put up a new monument. You don't like one? Put a better one up across the street.
The Ivy League colleges have a big cross to bear on this. And so, too, by the way, does Georgetown University. Not just because of their slave owning. I'm talking because they have a tenured professor working there today in 2017. His name is Jonathan Brown. And he believes that slavery and rape are okay, provided it's done by a Muslim. Go to Catholic League website. Just Google it. Don't have to go to Catholic League website. Just Google Jonathan Brown, slavery, Muslims, rape. You'll find it. I'm not making this stuff up. I can back up everything I've said.
Unbelievable. Before I let you go, the HHS mandate. President Trump promised to roll it back. I was there in the Rose Garden covering the event. Still hasn't happened yet. What's the holdup? What are you asking
I don't know what the holdup is for. It's certainly not because of lack of personnel. They have the authority to do this.
All it takes is a new rule. They keep saying the rule is written. At HHS.
I don't understand it. But I want to say this much. I think we will win on this. But I think that the one thing I want to say from the Catholic League perspective, yes, it's wrong to have Catholic nonprofits pay for abortion-inducing drugs and contraception and sterilization. The big issue is bigger than that. The macro issue is this. The government is deciding what is a legitimately Catholic institution and what is not. If you hire and serve people who are not Catholic, you're no longer Catholic. Well, one of the great things about my religion is that we're Catholic with a small c. We're universal. So would they prefer that the Little Sisters of the Poor say if you're a Muslim or a Jew, we don't serve you? Because that would make us really Catholic? See, this is a game. It was made up by the ACLU in the year 2000 in California and picked up by the lawyers of the Obama administration. If the federal government, talk about separation of church and state, if they can sit there in judgment and determine what's a truly Catholic institution and what is not, this game is over. And it's much bigger than abortion and contraception. It gets down to the question of who's going to define what a Catholic institution is. The government has no business doing that.
Bill Donahue, your passion is never wanting. Thank you for being here.
People get.
Well, don't look. Just don't throw that punch this way,
you're
pal.
a good guy.
Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. You can follow Bill's work and the work of the Catholic League at CatholicLeague.org. That is all the time we have for tonight. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. I've got all kinds of links there, and you can go to RaymondArroyo.com for the connections. Be sure to join us next week. Michael Medved will join us. We'll talk pop culture, movies, and his latest book, The American Miracle. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thank you for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo. Our hearts go out to all those people in the Gulf Coast in Florida suffering from Irma and Harvey. We're with you. We'll see you next week from Washington, D.C. Bye now.